Get the drive. The words, raw and serrated, cut through the hiss of the fire extinguisher and the acrid smell of burning plastic. Elias Vance, on his knees on the asphalt, chest heaving, looked from the mangled door of the sedan to the woman he had just pulled from the driver's seat. Her face was smudged with soot. A thin line of blood traced her temple, but her eyes were chips of blue ice, lucid and commanding. They weren't the eyes of a victim. They were the eyes of a queen whose castle was under siege. "Ma'am," he managed, his voice thick. His shoulders screamed from the effort of wrenching the buckled metal. "Not my briefcase," she rasped, gesturing with a trembling hand toward the car, where orange flames were now licking at the dashboard. On the floor, the flash drive, silver. Get it. For a heartbeat, Elias was frozen. He was a janitor. His job was to clean up messes, not run into them. His life was a carefully constructed fortress of anonymity, built to protect the one thing that mattered, his 8-year-old daughter, Maya. His purpose was to be invisible, to clock in, push his cart through the silent, moonlit corridors of Sterling Tower, and clock out, leaving no trace. This was the opposite of invisible. But the command in her voice bypassed reason. It was an echo of a life he had buried, a world of high stakes and urgent commands he thought he'd escaped forever. He moved without thinking, a low crouch, heat washing over his face. Inside the car, the fire was growing bolder. He saw it, a small silver rectangle near the passenger side floor mat, glinting in the hellish light. Beside it, a single sheet of paper had fluttered from a folder, a spreadsheet printout. He snatched the drive, his knuckles grazing a hot piece of metal. He winced, pulling his hand back. As he did, his eyes caught the page. It wasn't a conscious act of reading, but of recognition. A cascade of numbers, revenue projections against expenditure algorithms. His brain, the part he kept locked away and starved, processed it in a nanosecond. The amortization schedule for R&D capital was wrong. Not a typo. It was fundamentally, elegantly, intentionally wrong. A ghost asset, bleeding the company dry from the inside. A flash of another fire, another crash, the scent of gasoline and his wife's perfume. "Run, Eli. Take Maya and run." He recoiled from the car as if electrocuted, stumbling back. The flash drive clutched in his fist. The image of the numbers burned into his mind. The fire roared, consuming the vehicle with a hungry whoosh. He stood, breathing heavily, and looked at the woman. She was Eleanor Sterling, CEO and founder of Sterling Conglomerates. He emptied her trash cans every night. He held out the drive. Her hand was steady as she took it. Her gaze was fixed on his face, an unnerving intensity in her eyes. "You saw the P&L forecast, it wasn't a question." Elias shook his head, a denial that was both a lie and a desperate prayer. "I just grabbed the drive." "No," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, sharp and precise. "You saw it. Your eyes, you didn't just see numbers. You understood them." The first sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Paramedics were coming. Security was forming a perimeter. His window of invisibility was closing. He needed to melt back into the shadows, become the man who was paid to be overlooked. He had Maya to think about. Her drawing of a smiling sun was taped inside his locker, a fragile shield against the world. "I have to go," he said, turning away. "They'll help you now." Wait, the command was soft, but it had the weight of iron. He stopped but didn't turn around. "What's your name?" He hesitated. A name was a link. A link was a liability. "I work nights," he said, a half-truth that was a whole evasion. "Facilities." He walked away then, melting into the gathering crowd of onlookers, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He didn't look back. He couldn't, because he knew the cold, calculating eyes of Eleanor Sterling were following him, and in them he had not seen gratitude. He had seen recognition. She hadn't seen a janitor who had saved her life. She had seen a tool she didn't know she possessed. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that she would come looking for it. The quiet life he had sacrificed everything to build was about to be torn apart. The numbers were wrong, and now so was everything else. The summons came 12 hours later. Not as a polite request, but as an implacable fact. A man in a suit that cost more than Elias's car found him at the end of his shift, mopping up a coffee spill in the lobby of Sterling Tower. The sun was just beginning to dilute the night sky, and the building was a tomb of silent ambition. "Mr. Vance?" the man said. His name was Arthur, and he had the bland, impenetrable face of someone whose job it was to solve problems before they were acknowledged as problems. Elias didn't bother to ask how he knew his name. He just leaned his mop against the cart, the smell of disinfectant clinging to his clothes. "Yeah. Ms. Sterling requires your presence. On the penthouse level." The penthouse level was a myth to the night crew. A heaven of glass and steel they were never permitted to enter. It was her private domain. Elias's stomach tightened. "My shift is over. I have to pick up my daughter." "Arrangements have been made for your daughter's care," Arthur said smoothly, as if discussing a catered lunch. "A car is waiting." There was no room for refusal in his tone. This was not a negotiation. Elias thought of Maya, of the promise he'd made to her mother to keep her safe, to give her a life of boring, wonderful normalcy. That life was now a ship taking on water. He stripped off his work gloves, the faint burn on his knuckles a dull throb, and followed the silent man to a black town car idling at a service entrance. The elevator ride was a silent, vertical journey through social strata. It ascended past floors of cubicle farms, executive suites, and corner offices, finally opening directly into Eleanor Sterling's office. The space was less an office than an observatory. 3 walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a god's-eye view of the city waking below. The 4th wall was a single, seamless screen of cascading data streams. The air was cool and sterile. In the center of it all, behind a desk that looked like a shard of polished obsidian, sat Eleanor. She wore a simple gray silk blouse. A discreet bandage was visible at her hairline. Other than a slight stiffness in her posture, she showed no sign of the previous night's inferno. Her desk was clear save for a single tablet. "Mr. Vance," she said. Her voice was as cool and clean as the room. "Please sit." He took the chair opposite her. It was brutally modern and surprisingly uncomfortable, designed for deference, not comfort. "I've reviewed your employee file," she began, her eyes never leaving his. "Elias Vance, age 38, employed with Sterling Facilities Management for 2 years. No commendations, no disciplinary actions. Perfect invisibility." She paused. "Your previous employment history is thin. Gaps, odd jobs. Nothing that explains what I saw last night." Elias remained silent. His hands rested on his knees, his posture betraying none of the turmoil inside him. "You were a forensic accountant," she stated, tapping the tablet. "Lead analyst at Crestwood Financial. You exposed the Langdon embezzlement scheme. Your work was legendary. They called you the Ghost because you could find trails no one else could see. Then, 3 years ago, after the death of your wife, you vanished." The name of his old firm, the mention of Sarah, landed like body blows. He had buried that man. He had burned his suits, deleted his professional profiles, and taken a vow of silence. He had traded a 6-figure salary for a mop and bucket for the peace of being no one. "That life is over," he said, his voice low and firm. "Is it?" Eleanor countered, a flicker of something, not sympathy, but intellectual curiosity, in her eyes. "A skill like yours doesn't simply turn off. You saw that printout in my car. You saw the flaw in the amortization model in less than a second. Don't insult my intelligence by denying it." He met her gaze. "I saved your life. If that's all, I need to get to my daughter." "The car crash was not an accident," she said, ignoring his attempt to leave. The words hung in the sterile air. The steering column was compromised. A remote hack, sophisticated, meant to look like a mechanical failure. The fire was an accelerant, planted to destroy the vehicle's black box. Someone wants me dead or at least out of the way. The flawed P&L forecast you saw is connected. It's part of a much larger, systematic fraud being perpetrated against my company. I am being bled from the inside, and the person responsible is trying to silence me. She leaned forward, the intensity in her gaze pinning him to the uncomfortable chair. The police will find nothing. My internal security is good, but they look for sledgehammers. This is scalpel work. I need a ghost. I need the man you used to be. Elias felt the walls of his quiet life cracking. This was exactly the kind of fight that had cost him everything once before. Sarah had been the one to find the initial discrepancy at Crestwood. They had worked on it together, and the people they exposed hadn't gone quietly to prison. They had sent a truck careening through a red light. No, he said. The word was flat, heavy with the weight of memory. I can't. I won't. Eleanor watched him, her expression unreadable. She seemed to be calculating, reassessing. I understand you are motivated by the protection of your child. She slid the tablet across the desk. On the screen was a live video feed of a brightly lit classroom. Maya was sitting at a small table, her brow furrowed in concentration as she drew. She was safe. She was happy. She was also being watched. The implicit threat was suffocating. Is that my daughter? It is, Eleanor confirmed, her tone unchanged. She is at a private academy, the best in the city. My security team picked her up this morning. She thinks she won a special one-day scholarship. Elias felt a cold rage rise within him, so potent it made him dizzy. He stood up, his hands clenched into fists. You have no right. Sit down, Mr. Vance, she ordered, and the authority in her voice was absolute. I am not threatening your daughter. I am protecting her. The people who came for me are thorough. They know I was pulled from that car. They will look for loose ends. Right now, you are a loose end. And by extension, so is she. As long as she is with my people, she is untouchable. It was a brilliant, cruel trap. She had weaponized his love for his daughter, turning his greatest strength into his most profound vulnerability. What do you want? He asked, his voice rough with defeat. I have a data packet, she said, tapping the screen. A complex file structure appeared. It contains the company's complete financials for the last 18 months. Buried in there is the full extent of the fraud you glimpsed. The ghost assets, the siphon programs, the false accounting. My best people have been looking at it for a month. They see nothing. They say the books are clean. She looked at him. They're not ghosts. You are. This is your test. Find it. Show me one thread, one single piece of evidence that proves what I know is happening. Do that, and we can discuss the terms of your employment. Fail, and you can go back to your mop. But ask yourself, Mr. Vance, will you ever truly feel safe again, knowing that the people who tried to kill me are still out there? She was right. The quiet life was already a fiction. The monster he'd been hiding from was no longer in the past. It was here, now. He had been seen. He sank back into the chair, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a grim, familiar resignation. He looked at the screen, at Maya's innocent, trusting face. He had a choice to make: hide and pray the wolves didn't find his door, or hunt them down himself. It wasn't a choice at all. Give me the data, Elias said, the ghost stirring in its grave. And a secure terminal. And coffee. Lots of coffee. The secure terminal was not in a comfortable office. It was in a windowless room in the sub-basement, nestled between a humming electrical junction and the building's massive boiler. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and hot metal. It was a troll's cave, a place of exile. For Elias, it was perfect. Here, he was back in his element. A ghost in the machine, surrounded by the quiet hum of infrastructure. Eleanor had provided him with a military-grade laptop and a direct, encrypted line to the company's central servers. No one knew he was here except for her and the silent Arthur. He was officially on indefinite paid leave from his janitorial duties. The fiction was that he was dealing with a family emergency. The reality was that he had been conscripted into a silent war. For 3 days he barely slept. He sent Arthur out for food and coffee, existing in a state of hyper-focused immersion. The numbers swam before his eyes, a vast ocean of data. He let the patterns wash over him, not looking for a single error, but for the rhythm, the cadence of the company's financial heartbeat. Sterling Conglomerates was a behemoth, with dozens of subsidiaries and international divisions. Its books were a labyrinth by design, built to baffle regulators and competitors alike. To her internal team, the accounts were balanced. The ledgers were clean. But Elias wasn't looking for balance. He was looking for a lie. He started where he always did, with the things no one ever bothered to check. Expense reports from defunct projects. Write-offs for obsolete inventory. Interdepartmental fund transfers for amounts so small they fell below the threshold for automatic auditing. It was tedious, soul-crushing work, like sifting through a desert one grain of sand at a time. On the evening of the third day, he found it. It wasn't a thread. It was a whisper. A single discrepancy in the currency conversion fees for a subsidiary in Singapore. A tiny rounding error, less than 1/100th of a cent on each transaction. Insignificant, except the errors were all in one direction. A rounding down protocol that should have been random was exclusively benefiting the outflow account. It was the digital equivalent of a loaded die. Small, consistent, and over millions of transactions, it added up. He followed the trail. The siphoned fractions of pennies weren't being wired to an offshore account. That would be too crude. Instead, they were being funneled into a slush fund, a dormant holding company that Sterling had acquired years ago and forgotten about. From there, the money was being used to purchase materials, rare earth minerals specifically, through a complex chain of shell corporations. These materials were then sold back to another Sterling subsidiary, the Advanced R&D Division, at a massively inflated price. It was a perfect circle, a self-sustaining parasite. It wasn't just stealing money. It was using the company's own capital to actively sabotage its most innovative research by driving up material costs to an unsustainable level. It was brilliant, and it was deeply, personally malicious. He worked through the night, his fingers flying across the keyboard, building a map of the fraud. He isolated the algorithm, a piece of code so elegant and deeply embedded it was practically invisible. He traced its deployment signature. It hadn't been installed via an external hack. It had been uploaded from a terminal within Sterling Tower itself. The highest security level. An executive terminal. The enemy wasn't at the gates. The enemy was in the throne room. He compiled his initial findings into a stark, minimalist report. No speculation. Just the data, the path he had followed, and the code snippet of the parasitic algorithm. He encrypted it and sent it to the only person he could. He leaned back in his chair, the springs groaning in protest. His eyes burned from staring at the screen. The boiler room felt close and hot. He thought of Maya. Eleanor was true to her word. Twice a day he received a short, encrypted video of his daughter. She was painting. She was on a swing set. She was laughing with a new friend. The videos were both a comfort and a gilded cage. They were proof she was safe and a reminder of who held the key. His phone buzzed. A single, encrypted message from Eleanor. "My office. Now." When he entered the penthouse observatory this time, the atmosphere was different. The cool confidence was gone, replaced by a tension that was almost palpable. Eleanor stood by the glass wall, looking down at the city lights, her arms crossed tightly. She didn't turn when he entered. "It's worse than I thought," she said, her voice strained. "The R&D division is our future. Project Chimera. Next generation quantum computing. Whoever is doing this isn't just trying to steal. They're trying to cripple us. To make us vulnerable. For a takeover," Elias said quietly. It was the only logical conclusion. Drive down the stock price by sabotaging the company's most promising project. Then buy up a controlling interest for pennies on the dollar. She finally turned to face him. The ice in her eyes had been replaced by a slow-burning fire. "You did in 3 days what my entire finance department couldn't do in a month." She gestured to the chair. "You've earned a better seat." "I don't want a seat," he said. "I want my daughter back. I want my life back." "We are past that," she replied, her voice sharp. "You've proven you're the only one I can trust. This is no longer a test, Mr. Vance. It's an alliance. I need you to find out who, which executive terminal, which board member, which one of the people I have lunch with every week is trying to destroy me." Her use of the word alliance felt strange. It implied a partnership, a level of equality that didn't exist between them. He was a tool, a highly effective one, but a tool nonetheless. Yet, looking at her then, stripped of her corporate armor, he saw a flicker of something else. Not fear, but a profound sense of betrayal. The walls she had built around herself were as much a prison as his anonymity was. "The logs for the executive terminals are triple encrypted," he said, his mind already working on the problem. "Accessing them will trigger alarms." "Then don't trigger them," she said simply. "Be the ghost they named you. To do that, I need access. Physical access. The server farm is on the 44th floor. Biometric locks. Armed guards. My security chief is a man named Harris," Eleanor said. "I trust him implicitly, but I can't bring him in on this. Not yet. The circle has to stay as small as possible. You and me. That's it." She walked to her desk and picked up an ID card. It was blank. "This is a top-level facilities override card. It will get you through most doors. Not the server farm, but it will get you close. The rest," she said, her eyes challenging him, "is up to your ingenuity." He took the card. Felt heavy in his hand. "This alliance," he said carefully. "What are the terms?" "Find the traitor," Eleanor said, her voice regaining its steel. "Give me the proof I need to cut the cancer out of my company. When it's done, I will give you a new life. Any life you want. A house, a new identity, enough money that you and your daughter will never have to worry again. I will give you the one thing you crave, the freedom to be invisible permanently." It was the perfect offer. A golden door back to the quiet life he'd lost. All he had to do was walk through a minefield to get to it. "And my daughter. She stays where she is," Eleanor said, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. "It's the only way I can guarantee her safety. And the only way I can guarantee you'll finish the job." The gilded cage remained. Elias nodded slowly. He was in. Not because of the money or the promise of a new life, but because he understood the cold logic of her position. The threat was real, and now he was the only one standing in its way. He slipped the blank card into his pocket. It was time to go to work. Not as a janitor, but as a phantom, haunting the wires and corridors of a building that was trying to tear itself apart from the inside. The 44th floor was a different world. The air was colder, filtered to a degree that felt unnatural. The lights were a low, constant hum, and the silence was absolute, broken only by the whisper of servers processing billions of bits of data per second. It was the digital heart of sterling conglomerates, and it was guarded like a fortress. For 2 nights, Elias observed. He used his override card and his old janitor's uniform to move through the adjacent floors, mapping patrol routes, camera blind spots, and sensor dead zones. He learned the rhythms of the night shift security team. He knew which guard took a longer coffee break, which camera had a fractional second lag as it panned. He was building a mental blueprint of the floor's defenses, leveraging the invisibility he had cultivated for years. The man no one notices sees everything. He discovered that the primary server room was impregnable without Eleanor's handprint and voice command. But the network logs weren't stored in the main room. They were backed up to a secondary server bank in a maintenance nexus down the hall. The security was less severe, but still formidable. A pressure plate at the door, an infrared grid, and a keypad lock that reset its code every hour, synced to an atomic clock. Getting past the lock was the real challenge. He couldn't hack it remotely without leaving a digital footprint. He couldn't brute force it. He needed the code. His solution came from the place where the building's high-tech security and low-tech infrastructure met, the ventilation system. From his janitor days, he knew the building's original blueprints by heart. A small maintenance duct designed for HVAC repair ran directly over the maintenance nexus. It was narrow, dusty, and probably hadn't been opened in a decade. On the third night, he made his move. Dressed in his dark blue janitor's uniform, he moved silently through the deserted 43rd floor. In a forgotten storage closet, he pried open a grate and hoisted himself into the darkness. The duct was tight, the sheet metal cold against his body. He moved slowly, inch by painstaking inch, the sound of his own breathing loud in his ears. He positioned himself over the Nexus entrance. Through the grate, he could see the keypad on the wall. He had a miniature camera, no bigger than a button, which he carefully lowered on a thin, fibrous wire until it had a clear view of the keypad. Now he just had to wait. An hour later, a technician arrived to perform a routine diagnostic. Elias held his breath. The man swiped his card, and the keypad lit up. Elias watched on his phone screen as the technician's fingers tapped in the 6-digit code. He recorded it, pulled up his camera, and began the slow crawl back. The next hour was a race against the clock. He had less than 60 minutes before the code reset. He slipped out of the vent, brushed the dust from his uniform, and walked with quiet purpose to the Nexus door. He disabled the pressure plate with a thin piece of laminated plastic slid under the door, a trick he'd seen a locksmith use once. He took a deep breath, pictured the infrared grid he'd studied on the schematics, and moved through it in a carefully choreographed sequence of steps, a slow, deliberate dance. He reached the keypad and entered the code. The lock clicked open. He was in. The room was a cathedral of humming machines. He found the right server bank and, using a shielded cable and custom software he'd written himself, he began to copy the executive terminal logs. It was a massive amount of data. The progress bar on his laptop crawled. Every hum of the machines, every distant footstep from the hallway, sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. Suddenly, his laptop pinged. A system alert. Someone was attempting a remote wipe of the very logs he was copying. His blood ran cold. He had been detected. Or it was a coincidence. Terrible, fatal coincidence. The wipe was systematic, moving through the files chronologically. He was in a race with a digital ghost. He redoubled his efforts, pushing the transfer speed to its absolute limit, bypassing safety protocols. The laptop's fan whirred like a tiny jet engine. The wipe was getting closer to the critical files, the logs from the last 90 days. 70% copied. 80, 90. The wipe protocol hit the directory he was in. File by file, the data began to vanish before his eyes. 95%. 98. 99. Transfer complete. He yanked the cable, slammed the laptop shut, and was out the door a second later, resetting the keypad behind him. He didn't stop moving until he was back in the sanctuary of his sub-basement cave. His heart was pounding, his shirt soaked with sweat. He had the data, but the attempted wipe was confirmation. The traitor knew someone was hunting them. They were no longer just hiding. They were fighting back. He spent the next day analyzing the logs he'd managed to save. Most of it was routine emails, memos, video conferences. But he wasn't looking at the content. He was looking at the metadata, the digital fingerprints. He cross-referenced the precise time of the ghost algorithm's deployment with the terminal activity. For terminals had been active at that exact moment. Eleanor Sterling's, the chief financial officers, the chief technology officers, and Marcus Thorne's. Thorne was a senior board member, a man who had been with the company since its early days. He was charming, respected, and had mentored Eleanor when she was just starting out. He was family in a corporate sense. He was also in charge of the acquisitions committee, which meant he was perfectly positioned to know which holding companies were dormant and ripe for use as a slush fund. The evidence was circumstantial, but it was a powerful signpost. He started digging into Thorne, running his name through financial watch lists, searching for any hint of weakness or motive. He found it in a string of disastrous personal investments in biotech startups. Marcus Thorne, the picture of old money stability, was on the verge of personal bankruptcy. He needed a massive influx of cash. A hostile takeover of Sterling would give him that and more. Elias prepared his report for Eleanor, his fingers tight on the keyboard. He knew this information would be more than a corporate problem for her. It would be a profound betrayal. He sent the encrypted file and waited. The response was not a summons. It was a single, cryptic message. They know. Get out of the building. Take the service exit, south side. Arthur will meet you. Go. A cold dread washed over him. He grabbed his laptop, shoving it into a worn backpack. He didn't question the order. He moved, slipping out of the boiler room and into the labyrinthine service corridors. As he neared the south exit, his phone rang. It was an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Mr. Vance. The voice was distorted, digitally altered, but held a calm, menacing tone. You have been a difficult man to identify. A ghost, indeed. We admire your talent. But you have something that doesn't belong to you. Who is this? Elias asked, his voice low, even as he kept moving toward the exit. A concerned party, the voice said. Let's be clear. The data you possess is proprietary. We want it back. And we want you to stop what you're doing. To ensure your cooperation, we've arranged for a little motivation. The voice paused. Elias heard a faint sound in the background. A child's laugh. It was Maya. Maya is a lovely girl, the voice continued smoothly. It would be a tragedy if her school had a gas leak. Or a fire. Accidents happen all the time. Just ask Miss Sterling. The world tilted on its axis. Elias stopped, leaning against a cold concrete wall. The phone pressed hard against his ear. This was it. The escalation. The moment he had dreaded since this all began. They had found his weak point. They had found Maya. If you touch her, Elias snarled, his voice a low growl of pure fury. I will burn everything you've ever built to the ground. The distorted laugh came again. We believe you would try. So here is the arrangement. You will cease your investigation. You will delete all copies of the data you stole. And you will disappear again. Do this and the girl remains safe. Continue and we can't be responsible for her well-being. You have 1 hour to decide. The line went dead. Elias stood in the dim corridor, the silence ringing in his ears. The choice was impossible. His integrity, Eleanor's company, justice versus his daughter's life. It was no choice at all. The hunt was no longer about numbers on a screen. It had just become terrifyingly personal. The panic was a physical thing, a cold, crushing weight in his chest. For one wild moment, Elias considered doing exactly what the voice on the phone had said. He would burn the laptop, erase every trace of his work, and take Maya and run so far they'd never be found. He would retreat back into the shadows, deeper this time, a permanent exile. But as he stumbled out of the service exit into the gray light of the alley, he saw Arthur waiting by the town car, his face grim. The sight of him, a symbol of Eleanor's world, brought a new thought into focus. Running wouldn't work. They had found him once, while he was protected by the most powerful woman in the city. If he was alone, exposed, they would find him again. They would never stop looking, because he was a loose end they could never afford to leave untied. Hiding was no longer an option. The only way to keep Maya safe was to win. What happened? Arthur asked, opening the car door. They have eyes on my daughter, Elias said. His voice clipped and harsh as he slid into the back seat. They just called me. It was a direct threat. Arthur's expression didn't change, but a new hardness settled in his eyes. He spoke into a small microphone on his cuff. Condition read. Package is compromised. Execute Protocol Phoenix. He looked at Elias in the rearview mirror. Ms. Sterling anticipated this possibility. A team is already at the school. Your daughter will be secure in minutes. A sliver of relief cut through Elias's terror. Eleanor was always 3 steps ahead. Where are we going? To the Nest, Arthur said. The Nest was a corporate apartment on the 70th floor of a residential skyscraper a few blocks from Sterling Tower. It was anonymous from the outside, but inside it was a fortress of understated luxury and high-tech security. The windows were ballistic glass. The air filtration system could withstand a chemical attack. It was another gilded cage, but this one felt different. Safer. Eleanor was waiting for them inside. She was out of her corporate attire, dressed in simple black trousers and a sweater. She held a tablet in her hand, her face a mask of controlled fury. "Arthur just told me," she said as Elias entered. "Are you all right?" The question, so simple and human, caught him off guard. "They threatened Maya," he said, the words feeling inadequate. "They sent me a recording of her laughing." Eleanor's mask cracked. For a split second, he saw not a CEO, but a woman horrified by the depravity of her enemy. "My team is with her now," she said, her voice firm, reassuring. "They're bringing her here. She will not leave this apartment until this is over. I give you my word, Elias. She will be safe." She used his first name. The shift was subtle but significant. He was no longer Mr. Vance, the contractor. He was Elias, the ally, the man whose child was now in the line of fire because of her war. An hour later, Maya arrived, flanked by 2 of Eleanor's security personnel. She ran into Elias's arms, her small body trembling. "Daddy, some men came to school. They said we had to go on a surprise trip." Elias held her tight, burying his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the faint, crayon-like smell of her classroom. "It's okay, sweetie," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It's okay. We're going to stay in a new, fun place for a few days." He looked over her head at Eleanor, who was watching them from a distance. Her expression was complex, a mixture of guilt, resolve, and a strange, wistful sadness. The isolated queen was witnessing a bond she didn't possess, one that had now become both her greatest liability and her most powerful weapon. That night, after Maya was asleep in a large bedroom overlooking the glittering city, Elias and Eleanor sat in the sterile living room. The silence between them was heavy. "Thorne," Elias said finally, breaking the quiet. "It's Marcus Thorne." He laid out the evidence. The terminal logs, the motive of his financial ruin, the opportunity his position afforded him. Eleanor listened without interruption, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she wasn't drinking. When he finished, she stared into the distance for a long time. "I knew him since I was 22, she said, her voice soft, hollow. "He was on the board that hired me for my first junior executive position. He bought me a champagne toast when I made my first million. He was a mentor." The betrayal was no longer an abstract concept. It had a name and a face. "He tried to have you killed," Elias reminded her gently. She nodded, a sharp, angry movement. "I know." She looked at him, her blue eyes clear and hard. "You've given me the who, I have the why, but we don't have the proof. Not the kind that will hold up in a boardroom or a courtroom. The logs show opportunity, not action. His lawyers will call it circumstantial. We need something definitive, something he can't deny." "There has to be a ledger," Elias mused, thinking aloud. "A plan. Someone this arrogant, this meticulous. They always keep a record. A private file on a personal server, a hard copy in a safe. A trophy." "His office is on the 50th floor, Eleanor said. "Top of the executive wing. He's paranoid about security. No one gets in there without his direct authorization." "I've been in there," Elias said. To clean it, he closed his eyes, accessing a different kind of memory. Not data, but physical space. The smell of leather and lemon polish. The weight of the oak desk. The precise location of the abstract paintings on the wall. There's a safe. It's hidden behind a false panel, behind a painting of a ship in a storm. Eleanor stared at him. "How could you possibly know that?" "He had it serviced once, late at night," Elias explained. "He thought the floor was empty. I was in the hallway waxing the floors. I heard the technicians. I saw the panel open for less than a minute. I filed it away. Janitors see everything." A slow smile spread across Eleanor's face. It was the first genuine smile he had ever seen from her, and it transformed her features, softening the icy edges. "A ghost and a janitor," she said, a note of wonder in her voice. "You are a very surprising man, Elias Vance. We need to get into that safe, he said, the adrenaline of the hunt beginning to override his fear. Thorne is chairing a quarterly review in Zurich for the next 2 days, Eleanor said, her mind already shifting into strategic mode. His office will be empty. This is our only window. They were no longer on the defensive. They were going on the attack. The alliance, forged in fire and tempered by a threat to his child, was now solid. They sat in the silent, high-tech fortress, a disgraced analyst and a betrayed CEO, planning a heist. As he looked at her, seeing the fierce intelligence and newfound resolve in her eyes, Elias realized their relationship had changed fundamentally. She was no longer just his employer. She was his partner. And for the first time, he felt a flicker of hope that they could actually win. The plan was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. Eleanor would use her CEO-level credentials to disable the security cameras and motion sensors on the 50th floor for a precisely timed 10-minute window. During that blackout, Elias would have to get into Thorne's office, bypass the hidden safe, photograph its contents, and get out, leaving no trace. The safe is a Kressler 7000, Elias said, studying the schematics Eleanor had pulled up on a tablet. They were in the apartment study, a room that had become their command center. Maya was in the other room, happily drawing with a new set of art supplies Arthur had procured. Her cheerful humming was a stark contrast to the tense silence in the study. Digital keypad, but it has a mechanical override. A tumbler system. It's old school. Can you crack it? Eleanor asked. Elias thought back to a long-dead part of his life. A hobby. A fascination with complex systems, whether they were numbers or machines. I used to be good with puzzles, he said non-committally. He didn't mention the lock-picking kit he still had from his college days, a relic of a more carefree time, now buried at the bottom of a toolbox in his old apartment. He'd need Arthur to retrieve it. As Eleanor coordinated with Arthur, laying out the logistics, Elias felt a strange sense of calm descend upon him. The fear for Maya was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now fuel, not poison. He was no longer reacting. He was acting. He was taking control. He found himself watching Eleanor as she worked. She was relentless, her focus absolute. She anticipated every contingency, every potential failure point. He saw the brilliance that had allowed her to build an empire from scratch. But he also saw the cost, the profound loneliness of command. She trusted no one. She had built Sterling Tower as a monument to her own self-reliance, its glass walls keeping the world at a comfortable, sterile distance. And now, that world had breached her defenses, forcing her to rely on a man who, a week ago, she wouldn't have even recognized. Later that evening, as he was tucking Maya into bed, she showed him the picture she had drawn. It was of 3 figures, a tall man with a kind smile, a little girl with curly hair holding his hand, and a woman with striking blue eyes standing beside them. Above their heads, she had drawn a big, shining sun. That's you and me and Ellie, Maya said proudly. We're a work family. Elias felt a lump form in his throat. He looked at the drawing, at the innocent, hopeful world his daughter had created. He had to make that world real. The next night, he was back in Sterling Tower. Dressed in his dark blue uniform, he felt like a phantom returning to his haunting grounds. Arthur drove him, the car a silent bubble of tension. The blackout window starts in 5 minutes, Arthur said into his earpiece, his voice a calm presence in the storm. Miss Sterling is patched in. She'll be your eyes and ears. Copy, Elias said, his own earpiece buzzing to life. Elias, can you hear me? Eleanor's voice was crisp, clear, coming to him from the nest miles away. Loud and clear, he replied, his hands slick with sweat. He was in a service stairwell, 1 floor below Thorne's office. In his pocket was a small leather roll containing his lock-picking tools. Cameras and sensors on 50 are going dark in 3, 2, 1. Now, you have 10 minutes, Elias. Go. He moved. He ascended the stairs, pushed through the door, and walked swiftly down the plushly carpeted hallway. The silence was unnerving. He reached Thorne's office. The lock on the door was standard, and he picked it in under 15 seconds. He slipped inside, closing the door gently behind him. The office was a shrine to Marcus Thorne's ego. Dark wood, expensive art, a faint scent of scotch. Elias went straight to the painting of the ship in the storm. He lifted it off the wall. Behind it, just as he remembered, was the seamless panel. He found the magnetic latch and the panel swung open, revealing the flat, gray face of the Chrysler 7000. "I'm at the safe," he whispered into his mic. 9 minutes, Eleanor's voice replied, a calm metronome counting down his life. He took out a small stethoscope, a tool he hadn't used in years. He placed it against the metal, closed his eyes, and began to turn the dial. He wasn't listening for clicks in the traditional sense. He was feeling for them, for the subtle shift in the gears, the microscopic catch as a tumbler fell into place. It was about touch, about intuition, a language spoken between man and machine. 1 tumbler set. 8 minutes. The second tumbler was stubborn. He worked it back and forth, feeling for the groove. His mind was a blank slate, focused only on the tiny vibrations traveling up his arm. Second tumbler set. 7 minutes, Elias. He moved to the third and final tumbler. His heart was pounding. This was the one. Clicked into place. He turned the handle. The heavy door swung open. "I'm in," he breathed. "What do you see?" The safe was not filled with cash or gold. It was filled with documents. And at the very top, a slim, leather-bound ledger. He opened it. The handwriting was neat, precise. It was Thorne's entire plan. The hostile takeover, detailed step by step. The names of his co-conspirators, a hedge fund manager, a rival tech CEO. The schedule for the sabotage. And the payments. A multimillion-dollar wire transfer to an untraceable account, dated the day before Eleanor's crash. The purpose was listed in cold, simple script, contingency resolution. It was the smoking gun. "I have it," he said. "It's all here. The whole plan." He took out his phone and began photographing every page, his hands moving with frantic precision. 5 minutes, Eleanor warned. "Elias, you need to move." He photographed the last page and carefully placed the ledger exactly as he had found it. He closed the safe, spun the dial, and sealed the panel. He hung the painting, making sure it was perfectly level. "I'm out of the office," he said, pulling the door shut behind him. 3 minutes. "Get back to the stairwell." He was halfway down the hall when he heard it. The ding of an elevator. His blood froze. Thorne wasn't supposed to be back until the next day. "Elias, what is it?" Eleanor's voice was sharp with alarm. "Someone's here," he whispered, ducking into the alcove of a darkened doorway. The elevator doors slid open, and Marcus Thorne stepped out, followed by 2 men in dark suits. He was laughing, talking on his phone. Yes, the trip was cut short. A sudden opportunity presented itself. "I'll be in my office." Elias was trapped. The stairwell was too far. The security systems were about to come back online. 2 minutes. Eleanor's voice was laced with panic. "The system reboots in 2 minutes. They'll see you." Thorne was walking toward his office, toward Elias's hiding spot. In 30 seconds, he would be discovered. There was nowhere to run. The seconds stretched, each one a lifetime. Marcus Thorne strolled down the hallway, his voice echoing in the cavernous silence. Elias flattened himself into the shadows of the alcove, his mind racing, searching for an escape that didn't exist. The security systems would reboot in less than 90 seconds. The moment they did, the heat signature from his body would light up a monitor in the central security hub. He was caught. "Eleanor," he whispered into his mic, his voice tight. "I'm not going to make it out." "Don't say that," she commanded, her voice strained. "Think. There has to be a way." Thorne was 20 feet away. Elias could see the self-satisfied smirk on his face. He was a man who believed he had already won. Then Elias saw it. Not an escape route, but a chance. A desperate, insane gamble. Next to his alcove was a janitor's closet. His old domain. His sanctuary. "I have an idea," he said. "When the system comes back online, I need you to trigger a fire alarm. 50th floor. Zone C. The sprinkler system will ruin the servers," she protested. "Not a real one," he clarified. "A drill. A false alarm. Can you do it?" There was a pause, the sound of frantic typing. "Yes, I can override the system, but it will cause chaos." "What are you planning?" "Just do it," he said. Thorn was 10 feet away. Elias slipped out of the alcove and, in 2 silent steps, was at the janitor's closet. The door was locked, but it was a simple wafer lock. He had it open in 3 seconds, sliding inside and pulling the door shut just as Thorn passed by. He was enveloped in the familiar, comforting smell of ammonia and floor wax. He heard Thorn unlock his office door. He heard him step inside. "Eleanor, now!" "Alarm triggered," she said. Instantly, the hallway was filled with the deafening shriek of the fire alarm and the flash of strobe lights. A calm, automated voice began instructing everyone to evacuate. Through the crack in the door, Elias saw Thorn reappear, a look of pure annoyance on his face. "What in God's name is going on?" he bellowed to his men. This was his chance. Amid the confusion, Elias slipped out of the closet. He didn't run towards the exit. He ran towards Thorn's office. He pulled a small canister from his pocket, a concentrated smoke bomb, something Arthur had insisted he take for emergencies. He pulled the pin, tossed it into the office, and slammed the door. Thick, harmless smoke began billowing from under the door. He then grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall, just as Thorn's men came running. "Fire in the office!" Elias yelled, his voice muffled by the alarm. He looked like exactly what he was supposed to be, a janitor reacting to an emergency. He blasted the extinguisher at the base of the door, creating more chaos, more white clouds of chemical fog. People were emerging from other offices now, moving towards the emergency exits. In the pandemonium, no one was looking at him. No one saw the janitor slip away from the scene he had created and walk, with calm, deliberate steps, towards the stairwell. He was halfway down the first flight of stairs when the alarm stopped as suddenly as it had started. "It's done!" Eleanor's voice came through his earpiece, breathless. "Security is reporting a system malfunction and a minor electrical fire in Thorn's office. They're sending a team up. Get out of there!" He didn't stop moving until he was in the back of Arthur's car, speeding away from the tower. The photos were on his phone, encrypted and already uploaded to Eleanor's secure cloud. He had it. He had the proof. He leaned his head back against the leather seat, his body trembling with the last vestiges of adrenaline. He had walked into the lion's den and stolen the prize from under his nose. Back at the apartment, Eleanor met him at the door. She didn't say a word. She just looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror, relief, and awe. He handed her his phone. She took it, her fingers brushing his. She swiped through the photos of the ledger, her expression hardening with each page. "It's all here," she whispered. "The wire transfers, the names, the timeline." She looked up at him, and for the first time, the walls around her seemed to vanish completely. He was going to announce the takeover bid at the emergency board meeting he called for tomorrow morning. He was going to use my accident as proof of my unstable leadership. "Now you have the proof to show them who is truly unstable," Elias said. "This is more than enough to have him arrested," she said, thinking strategically. "But that's not enough. He tried to destroy my company. He threatened your daughter. I don't just want him gone, Elias. I want him ruined. I want to watch the empire he built on lies crumble before his eyes." Her voice was cold, lethal. This was the Ice Queen he had heard about, but now her fire was aimed at their common enemy. "Tomorrow morning," she said, her eyes locking with his. "He's expecting to preside over my execution. Instead, he's going to walk into his own." The final confrontation was set. It wouldn't be in a dark alley or a locked room. It would be in the place where power was absolute, the boardroom on the 52nd floor. Elias looked at the woman before him, no longer just a CEO, but a general on the eve of battle. He had given her the weapon. Now he would stand with her as she used it. The boardroom on the 52nd floor was a temple of corporate power. A long mahogany table polished to a mirror sheen sat under a low-hanging canopy of lights. One wall was glass, overlooking the city. The other was a state-of-the-art presentation screen. The air was heavy with the scent of money and ambition. Elias stood in the corner of the room, near the presentation console. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit that Arthur had provided. It felt like a costume, the uniform of the man he used to be. He was introduced to the board not as a janitor, but as a special consultant in risk analysis. The title was meaningless and perfect. He was a ghost, given temporary form. The board members filed in, a collection of grim-faced men and women in expensive suits. They took their seats, their expressions a mixture of concern and vulture-like anticipation. They smelled blood in the water, Eleanor's blood. Finally, Marcus Thorne entered. He was the picture of gravitas and concern, nodding solemnly to the other members. He shot Eleanor a look of counterfeit sympathy. He didn't even glance at Elias, dismissing him as just another suit in the room. Eleanor, Thorne began, his voice oozing false regret. We are all deeply concerned. Your accident, the subsequent instability in the market. The board feels we must discuss the future leadership of this company. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, perfectly poised. She let him talk, let him lay the groundwork for his coup. He spoke of stability, of a steady hand needed at the helm, of his solemn duty to the shareholders. When he was finished, a heavy silence filled the room. All eyes turned to Eleanor. This was her moment to plead, to defend. Instead, she smiled. Cold, sharp smile. Thank you, Marcus, she said, her voice clear and steady. Thank you for so perfectly illustrating the threat this company is facing. A threat of betrayal, of greed, of staggering hypocrisy. Thorne's smile faltered. Eleanor, this is not the time for... On the contrary, Marcus, she cut in. This is the perfect time. Before we discuss the company's leadership, I'd like to present a brief report from our risk analysis department. Mr. Vance. That was his cue. Elias stepped forward and, with a few keystrokes, brought the presentation screen to life. The first image to appear was a high-resolution photograph of the first page of Thorne's ledger. A collective gasp went through the room. Thorne's face went white. This document, Elias began, his voice calm and measured, was recovered less than 12 hours ago. It details a systematic plan to devalue sterling conglomerates through industrial sabotage, culminating in a hostile takeover. He clicked to the next slide. It showed the wire transfer. Here we have a payment of $5 million, authorized by Mr. Thorne, to an anonymous entity. The payment is dated the day before Miss Sterling's car was forced off the road. The memo line reads, Contingency Resolution. He moved through the slides one by one, laying out the entire conspiracy. The ghost algorithm, the shell corporations, the inflated invoices, the names of Thorne's co-conspirators. He presented it not as an accusation, but as a clinical, undeniable set of facts. The numbers didn't lie. The boardroom was silent, save for Elias's voice and the soft click of the keyboard. The board members stared, mesmerized, as the edifice of Marcus Thorne's reputation was dismantled, brick by brick. When the presentation was over, Elias turned the screen off. The silence that followed was absolute. Thorne was on his feet, his face purple with rage. This is a fabrication, a lie. This janitor and this hysterical woman have conspired to frame me. Is it a lie, Marcus? Eleanor asked softly. She placed a small, silver flash drive on the table, the same one Elias had pulled from her burning car. The original P&L forecast you doctored is on this drive. The one Mr. Vance, in his capacity as a janitor, was uniquely positioned to notice was fraudulent after my accident. An accident you orchestrated. Thorne stared at the drive, then at Elias, a flicker of horrified recognition in his eyes. He finally understood who Elias was. He saw the ghost. His composure shattered. He lunged, not at Eleanor, but at the console where Elias stood. "I'll kill you," he screamed, his face a mask of primal fury. He was reaching for the laptop, trying to destroy the evidence. Elias didn't flinch. He didn't try to fight him. He simply stepped aside and pressed a single, unmarked button on the wall panel beside him. With a soft hiss, a solid steel security shutter slammed down over the boardroom door, sealing them all inside. Another shutter descended over the glass wall, plunging the room into artificial twilight. It was a lockdown protocol Elias had learned about from the building's emergency blueprints, a feature designed for a hostile takeover of a different kind. Thorne stopped, his chest heaving, and looked at the sealed door. He was trapped. The hunter was now caged. Eleanor stood up. "Security is on their way, Marcus. As are the federal authorities I notified an hour ago. You've sat on this board for 20 years. You have 5 minutes to decide how you'd like to spend the rest of your life. In dignity or in disgrace." Thorne stared around the room at the faces of his peers, faces that now held nothing but contempt and disgust. The fight drained out of him, replaced by the hollow, crushing weight of utter defeat. He collapsed into his chair, a broken man. Elias stood back in the shadows, his work done. He had hunted the monster and dragged it into the light. He looked at Eleanor, who stood tall and resolute at the head of the table, her command absolute, her company secure. She had faced the ultimate betrayal and had not bent. She had not broken. She had triumphed. She met his gaze across the room, and in that silent look, 1,000 things were said. Gratitude, respect, acknowledgement of a bond forged in the crucible of shared danger. The janitor had saved the queen, not just from a burning car, but from the ruins of her own kingdom. The aftermath was a controlled storm. Security arrived, followed by sober-faced federal agents who led a silent, defeated Marcus Thorne from the boardroom. The other board members, shocked into submission, quickly and unanimously voted to give Eleanor Sterling emergency powers to stabilize the company. The coup was over. The cancer had been excised. Through it all, Elias remained in the background, a quiet observer. Once the authorities had cleared the room, only he and Eleanor were left. The silence returned, but this time it was not tense. It was calm, clean, the silence of a battle won. "It's over," Eleanor said, sinking into her chair at the head of the table. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were bright with victory. "It's over," Elias agreed. She looked at him, her gaze direct and searching. "What you did, thank you, doesn't seem adequate." "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You made a deal. You kept my daughter safe. The rest was just a job." "It was never just a job, Elias, and you know it," she countered softly. "You put your life and the life you built for your daughter on the line. For me. For this company." She stood and walked over to the presentation console where he stood. "The deal we made," she said, "was that I would give you a new life, a new identity, the freedom to disappear. That offer still stands. If you want it, it's yours." Elias thought of the quiet life he had craved for so long, the anonymity, the peace. For years, that had been his only goal. But something had changed in the crucible of the past week. He had been forced to reclaim the part of himself he had buried. The sharp, analytical mind. The man who solved impossible puzzles. He had forgotten what it felt like to use his gifts, to fight for something more than just survival. He had forgotten what it felt like to be fully himself. "I don't want to disappear anymore," he said, the realization settling over him with a surprising sense of peace. "Hiding. It's just another kind of prison." A slow, genuine smile touched Eleanor's lips. "I was hoping you'd say that." She extended a hand, not for a handshake, but as a simple, open gesture. "I'm creating a new division, Global Risk and Asset Integrity. It will report directly to me. I need someone to run it, someone with a unique perspective, someone who knows how to find the lies hidden in the numbers, someone I can trust, Completely. It was more than a job offer. It was an invitation, place at her side, a permanent role in the new order they had forged together. "What about my old job?" he asked, a hint of a smile playing on his own lips. "The facilities department is going to be short-staffed. I think," she said, her smile widening, "we can find a replacement." He took her hand. Her grip was firm, warm. It wasn't a corporate handshake. It was a connection, a confirmation of their alliance now transformed into something more. "I'll need an office with a window," he said. "You can have the one next to mine," she replied. The lockdown shutters began to rise with a soft hum, letting the morning light flood back into the room. Felt like a new day. For the company, for her, and for him. The ghost had finally come out of the shadows, not into a world of danger, but into a world of possibility. His work was just beginning. 6 months later, the view from Elias Vance's office was breathtaking. From the 52nd floor, the city spread out below like a living circuit board. His office was bright, minimalist, and next to Eleanor's. The glass wall that separated their spaces was a symbol not of isolation, but of transparency and partnership. He was no longer a ghost. He was the director of the most powerful new division at Sterling Conglomerates, a corporate legend whispered about in the hallways. The man who had saved the company. He wore the suits with an easy confidence now, the costume having become his skin once more. But he never forgot the feel of a mop handle in his hands, or the lessons learned in the quiet humility of the night shift. The door to his office slid open and Eleanor walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. She didn't knock. She never did. Theirs was a rapport that transcended corporate formality. "The quarterly reports are in from the European division," she said, placing a cup on his desk. "The new integrity protocols you designed flagged 3 anomalies. You were right about the Zurich office." "People are creatures of habit," Elias said, taking a sip of the coffee. "Even when they're committing fraud." She leaned against his desk, her posture relaxed. The Ice Queen had thawed. The crisis had changed her. She was still brilliant, still demanding, but she was more open, more willing to trust her intuition and the people around her. She had learned to lead, not just rule. "Maya's parent-teacher conference is at 3, he said, glancing at the clock. "I'm leaving in an hour." "I know," Eleanor said. "I cleared your schedule," she paused. "How is she liking the new school?" "She loves it," Elias said, a warmth spreading through his chest. "She's thriving." He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a piece of paper. It was Maya's latest drawing. A picture of the 3 of them, Elias, Maya, and Ellie, standing on a green hill under a smiling sun. It was the same picture she had drawn in the safe house, but this time they were outside, free. "She thinks you should come to her soccer game on Saturday." Eleanor looked at the drawing, a soft, genuine smile gracing her lips. "I think I'd like that very much." Their eyes met, and in the comfortable silence, the unspoken truth of their relationship hung in the air. It had grown slowly, organically, from the ashes of a crisis. A bond of respect that had deepened into trust, and was now blossoming into a quiet, profound affection. Later that afternoon, Elias walked out of the gleaming Sterling Tower, not through a service exit, but through the main lobby. The setting sun cast long shadows across the plaza. The same plaza where he had knelt beside a burning car half a year ago. Felt like a different lifetime. He arrived at Maya's school just as the final bell rang. She came running out, her backpack bouncing, her face alight with a joy that was the sole measure of his world's success. She threw her arms around his waist. "Daddy!" He hugged her tight, lifting her off the ground. "Hey, sweetie, how was your day?" "We learned about planets," she said excitedly. "And guess what? Ellie is coming to my game on Saturday." "I know," he said, smiling. "I'm looking forward to it." He took her hand, and they walked towards the car, their conversation easy and light. He had his daughter. He had his purpose. He had found a partner in a woman he never expected to even meet. The life he had lost, the one he thought was gone forever, hadn't just been reclaimed. It had been rebuilt, stronger and brighter than before. He had walked through fire, not just to save a stranger, but to find his way back to himself. And in doing so, he had discovered that the safest place to be was not in the shadows, but in the light. What does it truly mean to be seen? For one man, it meant trading invisibility for integrity, and discovering that the greatest strength comes not from hiding from the world, but from finding your place within it. If you were moved by this story of redemption and unexpected connection, please show your support by hitting the like button, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing for more tales of courage and transformation.